Hey Optimancers, Chris here. So for the last few weeks we've been discussing classes and subclasses from different levels and how good they are. So we talked about levels 1 through 5, 6 through 10, 11 through 16, and in this week's video we're going to discuss levels 17 through 20. So what I want to do is talk about the best and the worst subclasses and class combinations for straight class characters from those levels. Then on next week's video, what I want to do is do a full ranking. So we're going to just say overall what I think are the best and the worst classes ranked right from the bottom to the top, and I'm going to tell you what I think the best overall subclasses are for each of those classes and why. But before we do that, I want to thank some of my Archmage level patrons for their support. So I have a Patreon, and Archmages are my highest level of patron, and today I would like to call out some of those patrons. So Leighton Hagland, Joe Robideau, Ben Potts, Geek Dice, Dewey Cheatham and Howe, Nick Lutz, Henry Eveland, Scott Ballantyne, and my newest Archmage level subscriber, Matthew. Thank you so much for your support. My patrons are all very much appreciated for helping support this channel and what I do. And if you are interested in joining my Patreon, there is a link in the video description. My Archmage level subscribers also join me for a one-shot D&D session each month. So thank you to all my patrons, thank you to all my viewers. Let's get started. So we're going to start with what I consider to be the worst classes and subclasses from levels 17 through 20. And coming in at number 5, once again, there's going to be a Ranger here. And this is close. Rangers do get some nice things at high level. 5th level spell list for Rangers is actually pretty good. So Rangers do have some pretty good spells at this level. Now there's 2 subclasses of Rangers that are going to have less spells than all the other Rangers, and those are the Hunter and the Beastmaster. But the Beastmaster gets things like sharing spells with their companion, and the Hunter, their high-level abilities are actually not as good as the ability they got at 3rd level, in my opinion. In addition, Rangers themselves don't get a lot from 17 through 20 other than spells, because they get basically 2 things. They get Feral Senses and their Capstone. Their Capstone is awful. It's just terrible. And then Feral Senses could be good. You can detect invisible creatures, but you don't see invisible creatures, and you don't get disadvantage to attack them. But if you're in something like Magical Darkness, you didn't have disadvantage to attack them anyways, because they can't see you either. So that really doesn't always work out to be an advantage for you. So Feral Senses is a neat idea, but I'm not sure that it really works all that well. So we get a couple class abilities that aren't very good, and then the Hunter is not bringing a lot more. Besides that, beyond what they got at level 3, and they have less spell options than other Rangers do. So that's why they are sitting at number 5 on my worst list. That brings us to number 4 on our list, and my number 4 choice is the Fighter, and specifically the Champion Fighter. Now, the Fighter does get some good things between 17 and 20. They get a second action surge. That's actually really good. And their Capstone is good too, because they get a 4th attack. So there are some good things there for the Fighter. And frankly, that's what kept them out of number 3. But the Champion Fighter brings you less than other subclasses do. I discussed this before in previous videos. The Champion, compared to the other fighter subclasses, just gives you less options. It gives you less need abilities. It gives you less effective abilities. And their 18th level ability isn't that great either. It provides some small amount of healing, only if you are below half your hit points. So it's not even an ability you can use all the time. And other fighter subclasses have some pretty cool abilities at level 18. So the Champion Fighter just brings less than other fighters. And although fighters themselves are looking significantly better at that level 17 through 20 range, nothing they get compares to those 9th level spells. So the non-spellcasters are just going to have a tough time here. Even these abilities are probably not as good as 5th level spells that Rangers and Paladins are getting. And so it's just hard for a fighter to keep up with those spells, because spells are just getting better every level, and fighters are getting a second use of action surge This is an ability that they got at 2nd level, and they get 1 more use of it. So it's objectively no better than the ability they got at 2nd level, and they're getting it at 17th level. The 4th attack with their extra attack feature is great, but this is gained at level 20. And again, this is basically increasing 3 attacks to 4. This is not doubling your offense or anything like that. So these things, I'm not saying they're bad. I'm just saying that when we're talking about the very highest levels, the levels where the subclasses and classes are doing things that they've never been able to do before, these things are just kind of more of the same. Another attack, another action surge. And that's really all you're getting with the champion, other than a minor healing ability that you can't use all the time. So I do think it is the weakest subclass of the fighters, probably at any level, but definitely in the 17 to 20 range, and I think that the fighters themselves aren't doing great at this point. That takes us to what I think is the 3rd worst class and subclass combination at levels 17 through 20. And here we are going with the Barbarian. I think the Barbarian is worse than the Fighter at these levels. The Fighter, like I said, is getting some abilities that they're not super flashy, but they're still good. And they work well together as well. Action Surge works well with more attacks with your extra attack feature. With the Barbarian, at these levels, what we see is we get another increase to our critical damage. Again, we're only attacking twice a round, maybe 3 times if we have a bonus action attack. And most of the time, we're adding 1 die to a critical, and it's often a d6. It might be a d12, but it's definitely no more than that. Now, I will say that Barbarians get a pretty good capstone. They can increase their strength and their constitution beyond the normal 20 maximum, and that's a good ability, and that's a good capstone, especially for a Barbarian. But again, for the same reason as the Fighter, I just don't think they keep up with spellcasters. And that's why, even though they get a decent ability here, they don't get it to level 20. They don't get as much at level 17 as, say, a Fighter does. And I do think that it just doesn't keep up with spellcasting. Now, when it comes to the subclass I'm going to pick, I've talked about the Berserker Barbarian before. Berserker Barbarian actually gets a half-decent ability near the end where they can use their reaction for another attack every round, and extra attacks when you are something like a Barbarian are really good. And the subclass, I think, really suffers. And this subclass has never done well, but it is inched ahead of the Berserker before now, but now I think the Berserker is inched ahead of it, and that is the Storm Herald. The Storm Herald has abilities that just don't match up with the other Barbarian subclasses. We can even look at them point for point with subclasses they had very similar abilities, and they're objectively worse. And then we just continue that on, right until we get our final, what is basically the capstone of the subclass, which they're getting at 18th level, and it gives you a few options, and they're all really minor. A really tiny damage boost, or knocking something prone. I mean, we're talking about an 18th level character. Prone's not a big deal anymore. And the Storm Herald never gave you great choices, but these 18th level choices just aren't much better than the choices you got at much earlier levels, even what you got at level 3. And you would expect that a class's or subclasses abilities would improve as you move up in level, and we don't really see that with the Storm Herald. And so that's why I'm putting them as the worst subclass for Barbarian at this level. And that brings us to what I think is the 2nd worst subclass combination at this level. And I would say it is the Rogue. Now you might ask, where is the Alchemist Artificer? And the fact is the Alchemist Artificer now has 5th level spells. And that's not nearly enough to make the Alchemist Artificer, or any Artificer for that matter, one of the strongest classes at these levels. But it does allow them to get out of being the worst, because 5th level spells are pretty good. But when it comes to the Rogue, they're not getting spells unless they're an Arcane Trickster. And again, the abilities as we get into these upper levels are reasonably good, but not overwhelmingly good. We get an ability where we can basically take care of, if somebody's attacking us with advantage, we can take that advantage away. We also get a very limited use ability where we can turn a miss into a hit or a failed ability check into a successful one. I note that as a capstone, that's not very strong. Turning one miss into a hit, turning one ability check that failed into a success is not that great as a 20th level ability. It would be a lot better if it could either be used more often or if it maybe applied to saving throws as well. but it doesn't. And so Stroke of Luck, I think, as far as capstones go, is not very good. And then when it comes to the Assassin in particular, they get one ability at level 17 that is okay. And what it does is it's going to potentially increase the amount of damage you do when you surprise an enemy in combat. Of course, Assassins already did a ton of damage to creatures that they surprise in combat, so being able to improve that makes them even better if they can surprise their enemy. But in most combats, you don't surprise your enemy. That means in most combats, what is essentially the capstone of the Assassin, you can't use. Now, I will say that it's a better ability than the Assassin was getting ever since level 3. All that infiltration stuff that doesn't really work very well, even if you're doing infiltration, is a problem. But then we get to level 17 and we get an ability that, in the right circumstances, could be effective. But those circumstances just aren't going to be coming up enough that I think that this is going to be consistently good. So there will be entire sessions go by where you never get to use it. And that's a problem when we're talking about 17th through 20th level, and this is your best ability. So for those reasons, I think the Rogue just doesn't make it at these levels. I think if you are an Arcane Trickster, that this would be a different situation because those spells do make a difference, and the Arcane Trickster gets some nice uses of those spells. But with the non-spellcasting rogues, I think they're all suffering, and I think definitely when we're talking about the Assassin, it's just not doing what it needs to do by these levels. So that brings us to number 1. What am I going to talk about? I'm going to talk about monks, because monks still are the weakest class from levels 1 through 5, from levels 6 through 10, from levels 11 through 16, and levels 17 through 20, in my opinion. And the reason why my opinion hasn't changed for monks at these levels is because the monks just don't get very much. At level 18, they get an ability that is okay. It gives you invisibility, and it can give you resistance to most kinds of damage, almost all kinds of damage. The problem here is the monk just isn't delivering the damage. So when you got something like invisibility that's going to give you advantage on attacks, then we really would hope that the monk could really deliver a lot of damage. They're not able to do that. Neither of these abilities are particularly going to help the chance of a creature failing a save against your Stunning Strike, and that would be really nice for a monk to have at some point. They never get such a thing. And when we're talking about offense for a monk, when we talk about offense, what we expect is that as a class increases in levels, its offense is going to get better and better and better. We see fighters going from 2 attacks to 3 attacks to 4 attacks. Additional action surges. We see barbarians, their criticals get better and better and better, and then a big strength boost as a capstone. We see rogues, their sneak attack goes up and up and up and up, so it does more and more damage. With a monk, this is what you get. Your weapon, that was probably a quarterstaff or a spear, that's been doing a d8 damage for you all that time, will now do a d10. That's what you're going to get. It will now do a d10, and your punches will do a d10 too. A d10, of course, is probably the same or less than other characters were doing with their attacks all along. And you're getting a d10, and this is at 17th level. And your flurry of blows doesn't improve at all. You have the same flurry of blows you got at 3rd level. You have the same number of attacks you had at 5th level. So between 5th level and 20th level, this is 3/4 of your progression. The increase to offense is almost imperceptible. The only increase at all is the increase of martial arts die type, and that does not increase nearly enough. Martial arts die type should be multiple dice by this level. We should not be looking at a d10. We should be looking at something like 3d6 or something like that. d10 does not cut it for this level when there are weapons that do more damage than that. And then the monks get a capstone at level 20, and surprise, surprise, it sucks. It sucks. In order for this capstone to work, you must expend every key point you have. Every key point you have to just totally waste your resources. And then when you get to the next combat, you're going to get a tiny amount of key back. And keep in mind that, I talked about the 18th level ability being decent, and it's a decent ability. It uses 4 key points. So that would use your entire key pool that you would get back from your capstone. That's how bad that capstone is. It is just 4 key points is nothing at 20th level. It is so fast to go through 4 key points. even at low levels, but at high levels, ridiculously so, because so many of your abilities require multiple key points. And so you're just not going to get much out of your capstone ever. And if anything, it's a bit of a trap because it's going to kind of force you to waste your resources when you don't need to, or at least entice you to, so that you can get this tiny reward that isn't really much of a reward at all. So yeah, I really dislike the capstone for monks. You should be getting 4 key points back, regardless of whether you are out of key points or not when you roll initiative. How about that? At least then you're getting something without being forced to waste your resources in order to get it. But when it comes to the worst subclass for monks, I think at these levels, we're right back to the Sun Soul. The Sun Soul monk gets essentially a capstone at 17th level, and it is insultingly bad. They get the ability to shed light. So, wow, right? What you could have done with a cantrip, you can now do with a 17th level ability. And the other thing you can do with it is if you are hit with an attack from a creature while you have this light active, you can deal radiant damage to the creature. But that damage is terrible, and it uses your reaction. So you're using up your reaction for something that's not effective, and you're shedding light. And this is the capstone of this subclass. That is just, like I said, insultingly bad. Now, I will say, they are not alone in terms of monk subclasses giving very little at level 17. Again, I don't understand why we have a class that's weak and we fill it with a bunch of subclasses that are also weak in general. But the Sun Soul Monk, ooh, it's not good. Not good at all, and it finishes off just terribly, and it becomes the worst subclass, worse than the Drunken Master, worse than the Four Elements Monk. Sun Soul Monk just doesn't have what it takes. Okay, so the worst is over. Let's talk about the best. The first one I'm going to talk about, which I think is the 5th best class-subclass combination at these levels, is the Storm Sorcerer. Now, I don't like the Storm Sorcerer in general, and that's because most gameplay doesn't occur at levels 17 through 20. Most gameplay occurs at low levels, and I don't think that the Storm Sorcerer gets great abilities at low levels. But they get a fantastic ability as their capstone. You get Wind Soul. Wind Soul is going to give you a permanent flying speed, a good one. Or you can reduce your flying speed to an okay one, and you can have the rest of your party fly as well. Plus, you get a permanent immunity to 2 different damage types that come up once in a while, thunder and lightning. So 2 immunities, permanent flight, ability to give your entire party flight. There's a capstone for you. That is a good one. And then sorcerers are, of course, able to get some of the best spells at high level, and their 9th level spell list is insanely strong. And of course, the big thing is they get access to Wish. Wish is going to give them access to all those wizard things they could never do up to now. Wizards had the Simulacrum, and sorcerers always wanted that Simulacrum. Now they can use a Wish spell, get a Simulacrum with a 1 action casting and no material component. So sorcerers really push ahead at these levels, back into where the rest of the spellcasters are. And the Storm Sorcerer, I think, just gets the best capstone of any of the Sorcerer subclasses. Now, the Sorcerer itself gets some okay abilities. They get a capstone that I think is fine. It gives you a few sorcery points back whenever you complete a short rest. And normally sorcery points require a long rest to recover. 4 sorcery points isn't a huge amount. But I will say at least you don't have to be at 0 sorcery points to benefit from it. But overall, I think the Sorcerer does very well at high levels, and it achieves number 5 on my list, with the Storm Sorcerer being the best. Then that brings us to number 4 on my list, and now we're into the Bards. Now, the Bard capstone is not very good. For the same reason the Monk capstone is not very good. You have to be out of inspiration to get any benefit from it. Now, the one thing I'll say about a Bard is, if you expend all your inspiration, you're not as screwed as a monk is who spent all their key points, because your inspiration is actually a fairly small percentage of what you can do, rather than being the one resource that fuels everything you do. So I think if a bard spends all their inspiration, they're okay. But nevertheless, I don't think it's a good capstone. But their 18th level ability is awesome, and that's Magical Secrets. Now, they've gotten Magical Secrets before. The reason why this one is special is, of course, is because it's giving you access to any spell in the game now. We don't care what the level is. You can select a 9th level spell. You can select Wish. You probably will select Wish. and that's why this is really strong. So the Bard is coming in with a very strong 18th level ability, even though their capstone isn't that great. As for which subclass is best, well, the subclasses aren't getting anything new here. This is the same subclasses that we saw at our previous tier. So we're really not having any big change here. I still think Eloquence is the strongest for the same reasons I mentioned in the last video. The ability to reduce somebody's saving throw is really good. They have other subclass abilities that are really good. If you are not aware of the Eloquence Bard, that is the new Bard that is in the new Odyssey of Theros book. That brings us to what I think is the third best class-subclass combination in D&D at the very highest levels. And that, we're back to clerics, and specifically the Arcana Cleric. The Arcana Cleric is by far your best cleric at these levels. And the reason for that is because the Arcana Cleric can select one spell from the wizard spell list for level 7, 8, and 9th level spells. And it is treated as a domain spell, meaning it is prepared all the time, and it's not even using one of your base preparations. So these are up and above what every other cleric can do. That is a huge ability to be getting at these high levels. And clerics themselves, I think the spell lists aren't that great. Not at these high levels, but they do get a good 9th level spell. Mass Heal is a very strong spell. It is not the strongest 9th level spell in the game, but it is definitely still very, very potent and worthy of being on the 9th level spell list. So I don't think clerics are bad at this level, regardless of what subclass you are. But I do think the Arcana Cleric being able to access the best spell list in the game at the highest levels in the game makes them the best at this level for clerics, and it puts them ahead of the Bard. It puts them ahead of the Sorcerer. And that brings us to number 2 on my list, and I am going to surprise everybody here. Number 2 on my list is the Wizard, and specifically the Illusionist Wizard, which I talked about last time. So the capstone for the Illusionist, we already talked about in our last video, and that is illusory reality, where they can make an illusion real. That's just overwhelmingly good, and I think it makes the Illusionist the best wizard at high levels, specifically level 14 and up. And the wizards have the best spell list in the game, so wizards are getting the best spells at the highest levels, so the most powerful spells in the game, the most powerful abilities that classes and subclasses get in the game generally are the 9th level spells, and wizards get the best list. So why are wizards number 2? Well, wizards are really, really strong at high level. They're iconically strong at high level. But my level 1 pick is even better. And so let's talk about that. My number 1 pick from level 17 through 20 in D&D, just period. So this is going to be the most powerful character you could have if you reach 20th level and you are a single class character. And that is, and frankly, I think that actually includes multi-class characters too. I can't imagine a build that is stronger than this. And that is the Moon Druid. The Moon Druid was my top pick at levels 1 through 5, and then I mentioned that it kind of drops off because we rely on summoning more. Moon Druids aren't as good at summoning as Circle of the Shepherd Druids are. And our wild shapes don't keep up. And remember, we can't cast while we're in our wild shape. So that's a pretty big drawback. Now, the Druid spell list gets reasonably good at these high levels. It's not one of the best. But there are good spells on there. Shape Change is on there. It's a good spell. Foresight is on there. It's a good spell. They had a couple spell levels earlier that are good spells as well. Again, like I said, not the most potent spell list, but potent enough that 9th level spells still feel like 9th level spells. The reason the Moon Druid becomes the most powerful subclass and class in the game at the end of the game is 2 reasons. And those are both gained through the base Druid class. The first one is at 18th level, that Druid is going to be able to cast spells while in wild shape. Obviously, the Moon Druid benefits from this way more than any other kind of Druid. Now, they can't cast any spell. Spells that have a material component still can't be cast, but Druids can select from any spell on their spell lists and can change it with any long rest. So you can simply select spells that don't have material components. There's lots of spells that have verbal and somatic components that are really good. But the thing that really caps it off is the capstone. The capstone allows a druid to use wild shape an infinite number of times. Now for regular druids, this is okay. I mean, regular druids are really only using wild shape for utility, so it gives a limited utility, unlimited use. But a moon druid gets what is the best ability in the game. So they get the ability, of course, they already had it, where they can wild shape as a bonus action, equal to a challenge rating equal to up to a third of their level, so they can choose a challenge rating 6 creature. Not a lot of challenge rating 6 creatures in the game, but there's the Mammoth. Mammoth has 126 hit points. And because we can cast while we're in wild shape, this is what that means. It means that every turn that a Moon Druid gets when they're 20th level, they can use a bonus action to restore their hit points up to 126 in Mammoth form, and then use their action to cast a spell as normal. And that means they can take 100 points of damage a round for a combat that goes for 10 rounds, and they will emerge from the combat without having taken a single point of damage. Although they took 1,000 points of damage, it's all gone. It's all healed, because every turn they can essentially heal 126 hit points. That is so incredibly powerful, and it really creates an imbalance between the subclasses, because the other druids really get nothing even close to this. In fact, if I was only looking at other subclasses of druids, I'm not even certain they would be in the top 5. It'd be close. It'd be close. I'd have to look at warlocks closely. There are some problems with warlocks at high levels, even though I think they are among the more powerful classes at these levels. I don't think they're as powerful as other full casters at these levels. But when it comes to the druids, I don't think either they're one of the more powerful classes at these levels either when we're talking about full spellcasters. But the Moon Druid is the exception. The Moon Druid alone gets the most powerful ability in the game, and that's why I have to supplant the Wizard. Wizards at level 17 through 20 you would think would be a no-brainer, but because the Moon Druid is so powerful, they actually even push beyond that. Now on top of this, another thing that happens at 20th level, in addition to the infinite number of wild shapes, is now that restriction on material components on spellcasting is gone. So no longer do you have to worry about which spells you have to prepare. You can prepare any druid spell and you can cast it while wild shaped. So you can cast any spell you have. You can use your wild shape every round as a bonus action to get 100 plus hit points. So the Moon Druid kind of becomes invincible. So that is what I would consider the best and the worst class, subclass combinations at the top levels. And like I said, in next week's video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through every single class in order from the bottom to the top overall. And I'm going to give what I think is the best subclass for each of those classes. So I hope you'll join me for that. Until then, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D's for everyone. Thanks, everyone. Talk to you next week.